Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding, and I'm here with another episode of my Road to the Mr. Olympia series. This is the series of exclusive comparisons for those that have been qualified for the 2024 Mr. Olympia. At this point in time, we just have 2 shows left and just about 8 weeks to go, and plenty of comparisons to do before we get there. So I'm really starting to ramp these things up. And just this past weekend, we had a fan favorite finally get their qualification. Pretty easily, I might add. If you haven't heard, Andrew Jack just went to the Texas Pro, easily dispatched the competition with his best physique yet, and he won his 3rd Texas Pro title. So finally, I have a recent version to use for comparisons, and we're going to compare Andrew to literally his polar opposite. We'll be comparing him to this year's King of New York, the mutant Nick Walker. This is probably the biggest apples and oranges comparison I could do with the current crop of guys, so I'm very excited for this one. We'll be using the versions that got each athlete Olympia qualified, the New York Pro for Nick and the Texas Pro for Andrew. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos and want to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. With all that intro out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into episode 5 of the Road to the 2024 Mr. Olympia series. Apples and oranges. That's the epitome of this comparison for sure, and just look at the front double. Nick is very thickly muscled, maybe even too muscled for a pose like this, because although he looks very stout, complete, and so on, that stomach has now got some roundness to it. And his structure is also just a little weird to look at. His legs are a little too short for his body, and now that his stomach is a bit wider, he can look odd, and I do think he looks odd here. Andrew does not look odd. He looks more like a statue, and that easily makes up for him not looking as thickly muscled as Nick. But what about the different body parts? Is there a silver lining for Nick? Well, what about the arms? Those are Nick's to lose, of course, having some of the best arms ever. Well, he wins, but honestly, it's not by enough for me to even care. His arms are fantastic. They're harder and more balanced than Andrew's, especially when you include the forearms, but look at Andrew's guns. They're huge. He does have enough muscle here to make this an area Nick can't win and then by default also go on to win the pose. Basically, because Andrew's arms are so big, Nick cannot solely win this on his arms. So going on, what about the lats? Honestly, Nick does hold up quite well here in just the lats by themselves, but there is no doubt Andrew wins here as well. And then going down just a little bit more, the midsection is a no-brainer. I wish Andrew would go back to tilting to one side again to offset his obliques, but Nick's roundness is unsightly to say the least, so this is a slam dunk for Andrew. Against Flex Wheeler 2.0, you need to be as perfect as Andrew is. And finally, what about the quads? Well, just by themselves and not in conjunction with the rest of the physique, they're actually pretty close. Just quads to quads, I actually do prefer Nick. He has more depth to his legs, better details, and good size. But we don't just look at the quads in a vacuum. We look at them in conjunction with the whole physique. And that's why I would actually give Andrew the legs when we are looking at the whole physique. He has good detail himself, and most importantly, he has better sweep. Nick has none compared to his waist. His legs just don't fit his physique. They're short, they lack sweep, and Andrew's are literally the opposite. Overall, this leaves Nick with very little to his name for this shot. Andrew has better flow, structure, balance, huge arms, the better X-frame, good details from the front. I could go on really. I do want to cut Nick a little slack though for 2 things, his superior muscularity and the arms. I'd have to be out of my mind to ever give this pose solely to Nick, even if I was a mass monster lover. But I will give him the benefit of the doubt because he's still impressive. Now, I give the winner of the pose 1 to 3 points based on how much they win the pose by. 1 point means very narrow, 3 points means GG too easy. I know this probably should be a 3-point margin, but again, I do like freaks, so I'm going to shave off 1 point of Andrew's margin and just give him a 2-point win here. You'll see the next shot, and I think you'll begin to understand why I cut Nick a little slack on this one. We are going to very quickly bypass the front lat spread. Andrew is the best in the world right now in this one, and Nick is perhaps the worst. I couldn't find a photo immediately when going through Nick's collection because he never hits it, and I wasn't about to track this one down. We know how this would go. This is an easy 3-point win for Andrew. The side chest is actually a contentious pose, especially now that Andrew has added some more beef. Just from an overall perspective, his frame does make it hard on Nick to look impressive. He's just not as imposing, as thickly muscled as he may be. But Andrew does look a little awkward, and he does look slightly lanky. He has those long arms and legs, and he's not as filled in per square inch. And I don't really like how he's snapping the pose. Nick, on the other hand, looks like a tank. He's just a block of muscle, and for this pose, this is actually what I want. Let's break it down a little further though. Starting in the side leg, you gotta go with Nick. Andrew is big overall, but Nick is honestly fairly close with him, even though he has a much smaller frame, which is impressive. He's massive here, he has much better hamstring drop than Andrew, and overall the condition is no contest. Nick is grainier, drier, more detailed, all the above when it comes to his conditioning, and that's clearly evident here in the side leg. Now what about that upper limb? I'd actually give Andrew the delt. He's rounder, especially in that rear delt, and Nick is kind of flattening out from this angle. I would give Nick the arm though. He's a bit drier and has that size obviously. He doesn't have a skinny forearm either, which I may add. And finally, what about the pecs? Well, this may surprise some of you, but but I'd give this area to Andrew. Not by a lot, but a fairly noticeable amount. Nick has never had the strongest set of pecs in the side chest. Andrew really doesn't either, but he has a little more fullness top to bottom. They jut out a bit more all the way from lower pec to the clavicle region, and he has good detail. Actually, he's on par with Nick here. So from either perspective, overall wise and from a per body part basis, Andrew does hold up quite well, but not well enough to take this one in my opinion. Nick is too thickly muscled. Yes, Andrew may win the pecs and he can look okay when zooming in on other body parts by themselves, but when you zoom out, while Andrew is overall bigger, Nick is just stacked. He looks again like a tank. Andrew looks really awkward with his posing too, and when you are examining him as a whole, he does look lanky next to Nick, even though he is completely dwarfing Nick in terms of height. And Nick also can add a clear quality advantage to his column. However, despite all of this, I am going to give Andrew a lot of props here. Let's be honest, Andrew is dwarfing Nick. He won the pecs as well, and if he had better conditioning, this would be a lot closer than most, including myself, would like to admit for Nick. So I'm going to make this just a 1-point win for Nick. Andrew is just too huge. Feel free to disagree with me in the comments though. I want to know what you guys would have the margin as for this one. For me, it's going to be 1 point, but really the best I could do is 2 points. Just because Andrew is so big, so tall, he's just as impressive as Nick, just in the different way. Now we're going to oppose a couple of them actually where Nick should be able to make up some ground. Nick's rear double is quite good from head to toe, while Andrew's entire posterior chain is his main weak link. Now just looking at these two overall, Andrew again has the overall advantage. He is immense. His back is wide and has good roundness to it, but the difference in the conditioning is a vast one. Nick makes Andrew look like he's doing a guest posing, and this is before we even really zoom in and examine. But Nick could honestly win this on conditioning alone because you just can't have Andrew winning this shot with that kind of shape. Now let's start in the lower body. We saw this in the last pose. Andrew's hamstrings are weak, not just because his conditioning is bad, but he just straight up needs more development to them. Nick contrasts this with his thick hamstring cords, and of course he is just peeled. Even his quad sweeps are good from this angle. So are his inner thighs. He's beating Andrew there as well. The glutes are also no contest. Overall, this entire bottom half is just a total win for Nick. The back isn't exactly much different either. Now Nick's back has been better before, but he certainly is doing enough here. It is mainly on condition though. Andrew is massive, he's wider, he's round, and I'd bet he'd have just as much going on in his back if he was just a little more peeled. But because Nick did his homework, he has that detail. But honestly, the win in the back isn't really that resounding to me. It's clear, but I'm thinking Nick is just lucky his opponent is soft. Even Nick's famous arms and delts are in question. I still think he wins this region because he has great peaks, better forearms, and better posing in this area, but Andrew could definitely win here if he was just a bit sharper. So overall, Nick gets a win here, but that sigh of relief shouldn't be too heavy. But at the same time, I do think this is convincing enough for a 3-point win. I did think about 2, but Andrew just gets beat everywhere. There really isn't an argument for Andrew to win this one. But if at the Olympia he shows up shredded, I think it will get pretty close. I know it may not seem like it now, but underneath that subpar conditioning is a very good back on Andrew. I'm not saying he'd win. He still needs more time to bring the hamstrings up and probably thicken up the back just a tad, but just a change in conditioning and a little posing tweak would nullify one of his main weaknesses. And since this comparison is close, that may be all Andrew needs on show day to place higher than Nick. Now, if you didn't agree with me on the margin of the last back post, stay with me here because Andrew Jacked is going to make up some of that ground here in the rear lat spread. Let's get a few obvious things out of the way. Andrew Jacked is definitely wider than Nick. Nick is shorter and obviously more narrow than Andrew. Andrew's back is extremely wide just in and of itself. The other obvious thing is the lower body win for Nick. Not to discredit it, but we talked about it in the last pose and Andrew just isn't holding a candle here, so it's obvious. Let's just move on. Let's go back to talking about the back because here we are honestly quite in a battle. Again, Andrew is wider. He is so much more genetically gifted than Nick. He has that shoulder width, and now that his back is more filled in, Andrew's lats are actually quite impressive as well, just from a width perspective. Andrew's back also has these round qualities. He has the thick columns along the spine, of course, built up by his bulging spinal erectors and traps, so these things are impressive for sure, and the width is obviously the most important thing there, and Andrew of course wins that. But in terms of quality and conditioning, Andrew isn't holding a candle to Nick's back. He's round and wide, sure, but next to Nick, he looks largely unrefined. Nick's conditioning is absolutely better than Andrew's. His back is drier and grainier, and for his frame, he does have okay width, and his taper is actually surprisingly good. But we can't say that Nick is winning the most important thing. Everything else, sure, lower body definitely, and the detail aspects of the back as well. So what does that margin look like? Well, I gotta be honest, Nick is only winning the lower body 100%. The back is arguably going to Andrew because again, he is winning the most important thing. I get the quality aspects, but what about the width? Andrew is overwhelming Nick to some extent. And after looking at other photos and videos, I was only more and more impressed with Andrew when he gets better photo quality and lighting. So I gotta be honest, I'm surprised by this, but Nick is only taking this pose with 1 point. He still has the better balance between the two and the better quality, and a very good back himself, so he is going to win the pose nonetheless, but with that narrow 1 point margin. Let's go to our last side pose now, the side tricep. This pose was always a strong one for Nick, and it is still. His side leg is big, grainy, and the arm is thick, including the massive tricep. And from this angle, he's never really had a problem with his waist either. He keeps it pretty locked in, and those abs are of course just crazy. But Andrew in this pose has surprisingly stepped his game up. Now he does still prefer hitting it head on, making it a pseudo abs and thighs pose. To me and the judges this doesn't really count, but luckily Andrew has now started doing it from the side as well, at least a little before he switches to his front version. So the side version is what I used here. And you know what? This is actually pretty good. He doesn't look as awkward as he used to, and he still has some good things going for him. His side leg looks okay, still needs more detailed and more hamstring drop. The midsection is streamlined, of course, the pecs are bulging, and his tricep is pretty good. Nick just has better things though. His tricep beats Andrew's for sure, the side leg is also going to Nick. I'd even give Nick the midsection to be honest. Yes, it is not as small, but those abs are just too crazy. And then overall Nick just looks too stout and filled in, but Andrew's on the other side of that coin looking very streamlined. I can see the argument for this being closer than I'm going to make it, but I'm having Nick win with a 2-point margin here. Outside of Hunter Labrada, Nick has the best side tricep in the world. And really no one is saying that about Andrew Jacked. Now let's follow up that pose with another easy one. Andrew wins the abs and thighs easily with 3 points. But you know what? If this had been Nick from the 2023 Arnold Classic where he was more streamlined, this actually wouldn't have been a perfect score in my eyes. It would have been tough, but when Nick was streamlined, that took out his major weakness, and his abs are quite good. And like I said earlier, so are the quads by themselves. So I think I would have made that 2 points, or at least gave him some props that although it's a 3-point win, it was actually closer than some people would have expected. However, that 2023 Arnold Classic version was not what we saw at this year's New York Pro. It really wasn't a major change, but at the same time it was. His stomach just got a little bit bigger, and that derailed everything. He had a little too much roundness to it, and for a guy like Nick with that structure, he can't have any of that. Unfortunately, he just didn't prevent that roundness of the stomach. It got a little wider, and that kind of ruined his entire physique for a lot of people. It certainly made his physique worse objectively. Now he looks more like a crab or a spider. Big body, stubby legs, and the abs aren't even that good because he can't crunch down on them fully anymore. I think I am really going on though. This is the clearest pose of the match. I'm not even going to talk anymore about this one. We're ending this comparison with another easy one, but we're flipping the script from the last pose. This is the most muscular, and I don't think anyone expected Andrew to win this one. Now, the margin is something I am contending with because Nick smokes him in just about everything, but we know on a real stage, Andrew is going to make Nick look a bit short and less impressive. But let's go through this one just to see how much Nick does actually win. Let's start in the quads. This is actually an area I'd give to Andrew, but just slightly though, mainly for his shape and the sweep. I like the shape to his quads, and of course the sweep is no contest, especially in conjunction with the rest of the physique, but Nick's quads are really on Andrew's heels. He's certainly more conditioned, grainy, all the above, and since he's covering his waist up in the shot, it really does make his structure look less awkward. His quads do not look so out of place. So this area is closer than some may expect, but I would give the edge to Andrew. Same goes in the midsection, to be honest. Nick gets to cover a lot of his, and his abs look okay when he's hiding the stomach roundness, but we all know Andrew wins the midsection every time. It is a win for Andrew, but in a pose like this and with that margin, it doesn't really do much for him. And then moving on, Nick easily wins the arms and delts. Andrew looks incredibly lanky next to Nick, who is packing every single square inch of his upper limbs with more beef, and he certainly has the quality advantage again. For the chest, however, I would give Andrew the slight edge because they both kind of flatten out from this angle, but Andrew has more detail. So honestly, it's more of a mixed bag when going body part for body part, but when you just look at these two guys, Nick looks like a freak and Andrew looks a little too aesthetic. And sure, that won him the front double, front lat spread, and abs and thighs with flying colors, but that's not the look I want in this pose. However, I do think the overwhelming structure, the towering height, and Andrew straight up winning a few body parts does allow him to limit Nick's margin to just 2 points. It really is just because Andrew is so impressive to look at in his own right. Not exactly how he needs to be, but I think he has too much going for him to make this a clean sweep for Nick. Now we're moving on to the second phase of my judging, the overall physique categories. Here I take a look at shape, muscularity, flaws, and conditioning through a whole physique lens. The point system is still the same, we're just stepping away from the specific poses and examining the whole physique at the same time. Let's start with some of the easy ones. Andrew's winning shape with 3 points, enough said. Nick will clap back though with a big 3-point win in the conditioning aspects. Nick was sharper, more mature, grainier from the front, even though Andrew is fine from the front as well. Nick was just better, and from the back it was no contest. Now here's another easy one, muscularity. Nick wins, but it's a little less easy to determine the margin. It's definitely not 3 points, as freaky as Nick is, because Andrew is so big and now 300 pounds, that does diminish Nick's win here. Nick is more muscular pound for pound, and that was clear. He was making Andrew look a little lanky at times. Not only that, however, but Nick was more complete. He had his flaws for sure, but you can't say missing body parts was one of those. But just think about these two together on stage, you have to think Andrew's probably going to steal a little of Nick's thunder and draw much more attention to himself. So as wrong as this may sound, I have to limit Nick's win in the muscularity department to just 2 points. I think the 3 and 1 point margins are just too crazy. Andrew is bigger overall, but Nick is the mutant. He was bigger pound for pound, and he's more complete. And now we have the flaws category, which I really did debate on. Nick's large waist has already been factored into this section of judging already. That's why there's a shape category, and he did lose that by 3. But is that going far enough? Is it so bad that he needs to step outside the shape category and get punished in another one as well? But it's not just exactly the stomach, you also have the structural problems. Yes, including the waist, but it's not just that. It's the whole physique, the proportions are a little off. Again, he has the short legs and he just doesn't have the best flow. But Andrew is not flawless. He does have one flaw. Posing. Some mandatories just need to be changed. It's a little too obvious for me to ignore. But this, of course, pales in comparison to what's going on with Nick. So overall, Andrew is definitely winning the flaws category because his flaws are less detrimental, but by only 1 point. I get it, Nick had notable flaws, but in order to be fair, I can't double down on those when he's already been punished in another category. So don't think of this as me ignoring Nick's flaws. I still kinda am double dipping here in a way, punishing him twice. So instead, think of the punishment being spread across 2 categories. Some would say this is not enough and he should also lose the flaws category by more. I think a loss of 4 points in this section because of the waist, 3 in shape and 1 in flaws is enough. Although he didn't lose the section of judging, he was majorly hurt by his issues, and I do think that is enough. So do apples or oranges win this comparison? Well, I think apples takes this, and by apples I mean Nick. He won this comparison with 53.8 points to Andrew's 46.2. So overall this was a very, very close comparison. So close in fact, I'm not even going to make an official prediction on who's going to place higher just yet. I wanted to make a prediction at the end of every one of these episodes in this series, then my final predictions at the end, but for this one I do think it's fairly up in the air. We've seen recent decisions that would favor both gentlemen. We've seen guys with considerable gaps win shows like the 2023 Arnold and the Olympia, and with decisions like those, it would lead you to believe Andrew would place higher. But we've also seen recent decisions where the opposite happens, where someone kind of brute forces their way to the top on sheer size and conditioning. I will declare my personal winner of this comparison though, and I guess if you really pushed me, I would say this would also be my prediction, but yet again, that is still up in the air, because I don't know what the Olympia is going to do. But anyway, my winner is Nick Walker, and to me this is pretty self-explanatory. Basically, shape does matter. I don't mind having more aesthetic guys at the helm of the sport, but right now Andrew is lacking too much. The only reason this comparison was close because Andrew ran up his margins in 3 poses. Other than that, Nick won 5 poses and scored big wins in the muscularity and conditioning categories. And honestly, as I'm looking back, I felt that I was kind of harsh on Nick. I only gave him 1 point wins in the side chest and rear lat spread. Those could probably be 2 pointers if he really pushed me. The most muscular could also be a 3 pointer really, but Andrew also could have won the front double with 3 points. But Nick is still hella impressive in that one in his own right. So there were definitely some disputes to be made over Nick's margins, but there aren't really any for Andrew. There can't be. He won 2 out of his 3 poses with perfect scores. The problem for Andrew is that right now at least, that's basically all he can do. 9 points in my own comparison is basically his ceiling. If he's going to go up against someone who has good size, even just decent conditioning, or someone that can limit his shape factor, he's in trouble. Right now he has 3 poses, sometimes a few more, but he's really weak in a few areas. The most muscular is awkward, the back poses need much better conditioning to be threatening, and even though his 3 poses are fantastic, there are 8 total poses. He's not even winning half of them. Again, even if he scores perfect scores in those 3 poses, 9 points would be his ceiling. Nick is just the better bodybuilder at this point. Now, he doesn't have the better physique. I'm sure the vast majority of people would prefer to look like Andrew over Nick, but that does not guarantee you a win. I think if Andrew brought up his conditioning, we could have the conversation of him winning immediately. But right now, that's far from the case, and he needs other things too, really. Nick just didn't out-condition him severely. He was more complete. Andrew has gaps in his physique. Not huge ones, but ones that are apparent and pretty objective. These are the things that make Nick the better bodybuilder. He's more shredded, he's more massive, and he's more complete. And those are the things that make him the winner of today's comparison. I know some of you will say, well, Andrew should win because shape matters the most. Unfortunately, given the mixed results of recent shows, I don't know how much shape matters exactly, but I would say it's mattering more and more, even if we get some weird results sometimes. But even if it was the most important thing, you can't be sorely lacking in everything else. Right now, I see Andrew as kind of one-dimensional. He wins the shape debate always and locks down 3 shots against about everyone. But he's going to need more than that at the Olympia level, and he needed more of that here today in my mind. Nick's physique isn't pretty, but it sure is impressive, and that size and completeness combined with his conditioning won him today's comparison. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. This was an apples and oranges debate, so I'm sure there will be plenty of different perspectives. Who do you guys have winning this comparison, and who are you predicting to place higher at this year's Olympia? Let me know down in the comments. And if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more videos just like this one, and to stay up to date on my road to the Mr. Olympia series. And by the way, if you guys are looking for some high quality supplements and want to support the channel, feel free to check out Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, be sure to use my code PROJECT10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code PROJECT10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Alexia.